All right, thank you all again for joining. So I'm just going to stop sharing this. And just another quick reminder, we do have quite a few people on the line. Hopefully most of you are here for Eco 201. We are starting with Eco 201 at 8:30, and then at 9 o'clock we'll transition over to Eco 202. So if you're here for Eco 202, feel free to hang out or come back in about half an hour. All right, so the first thing I want to share with you guys today is the final project document for Eco 201. Let me just make sure I've got the right one here. I do. Okay. It's great to see everybody's from so many different places. I know we always have a lot of New Englanders at SNU because, you know, we are a New England college, but it's always nice to see people from afar. So the reason I like to start with the final project, even though we are just working on the milestone, is because sometimes students don't realize that our milestones are really just pieces of the final project that you're going to turn in. So I really like to make sure that everyone is familiar with what the final piece is going to look like. So your final project, if you haven't reviewed this document already, it basically gives you an entire overview of what you're going to submit in week 7. Now it's going to be about a 9-page paper that you're analyzing a company. You're sort of pretending that you're a consultant and you're analyzing a company using the microeconomic tools that we develop in this course to make some specific recommendations for them about some things that they can do to remain profitable and sustainable going forward. So that's the overall gist of your paper. And it's outlined for you. So you don't have to think about which microeconomic concepts you're going to use to analyze the firm. It's all laid out for you. So we won't be covering most of this in this milestone since we haven't really developed those tools yet at this point in the term. This week, we're just being introduced to supply and demand. So we're not expecting you to put all that in there just yet. You're just going to be writing your introduction for the milestone this week. But I do think it helps to see everything that you're going to include in the paper, even if you're just writing a small piece of it right now. So you'll see that the different sections are outlined here with each of the critical elements listed as well. So the first section is the introduction. The second section is on supply and demand. The third section is on price elasticity of demand, which we'll cover in week 3. The fourth section is on cost of production, which we cover in week 4. The fifth section is on overall market, which we cover in weeks 5 and 6. And your recommendation is sort of just wrapping up all of your findings and making some specific suggestions for your firm. And all of this will be due, your final draft is due in week 7. But this is broken up into 3 different milestones. The first one, which we're going to talk about mostly tonight, just covers section 1 here. The milestone 2 is going to include sections 2 and 3. So those are Roman numerals 2 and 3 that you'll see here. And the last milestone, milestone 3, which you'll be submitting in week 5, includes Roman numerals 4, 5, and 6. I'm just going to make sure I haven't missed any important questions in the chat. Looks like we're good. So the nice thing about the final project document is it also breaks down the milestones. So this is kind of a nice one-stop shop document for some of these aspects of the course, even though you will want to look at the milestone rubric as well, which we'll talk about in a moment. So you'll see here that it talks about the sections that are included for each milestone, milestone 1, 2, 3, and then your final submission. And then it also reminds you that each of the milestones is graded with its own special rubric. And it breaks down when they're due and how they're graded. You can excuse my snoring dog. If you can hear her, apologize. So this document, while it does talk about some of the milestones, it doesn't have the grading rubric for the milestones. This only has the final project rubric, which is how you're going to be graded in week 7. So by the time you get to week 7, you will have received feedback on each of your milestones so you can improve them, polish them up, add some more detail based on the feedback you get from your instructor and based on just your overall improvements in working on the paper, and submit a final project in week 7. So this rubric is a little bit stricter, we'll put it that way, than the milestone rubrics. So the milestone rubrics are a little bit more lenient, and they're kind of grading you more as if it's a draft than if it's a final project. So that's something I like students to keep in mind. So the essential difference when you're looking at the two side by side, even though they're going to include in totality all the same critical elements here that you have on the left, what the milestones do not have when they're graded is this exemplary column. So in a milestone, the highest score you can get is proficient. So a proficient on any critical element on all three of your milestones will be a perfect score, even though that same level of performance is an 85% here. So that's just something to keep in mind, that the milestones are graded, again, like a rough draft. All right, so it looks like Jamaica has a question. Can we have any company of our choice for our paper? Does it have to be approved? So that's a great question. So ideally, we like students to pick their company in week 1 so that you have all of this week to start gathering the information you need to write your milestone. But if you haven't picked yet, that's fine. We do have a suggested companies list, which is in the final project resources. I guess you could say folder. So on your left-hand navigation in your Blackboard course, you'll notice that there is a link that says Final Project Resources. So if you click on that, it will bring you to a bunch of documents. It'll have these rubrics there, the Final Project Guide, which we're going to go through in a moment, and it will also have a suggested companies list. So if you pick from the suggested companies list, it's automatically approved. But do let your instructor know. So still say, email them, say I'm picking this company from the list, like Southwest Airlines, let's say, as an example, that's on our list. And then you'll be fine. If you want to pick something not on that list, there are some criteria. So the criteria are listed here in the final project document for those of you who haven't selected. We'll scroll up to that bit. Let's see. So the firm has to be publicly traded. So it has to be listed on the stock exchange, and it has to be based in the US. And it has to currently be in business. So the reason that it has to be publicly traded is because we want to make sure that you have access to their financial information, which you're going to need for certain aspects of the paper. And then the reason we like it to be based in the US is because we want to make sure it's listed on the US stock exchange so that it's reporting the same kind of information that is required. Again, this is just to make your life easier. If you pick something outside of these parameters, you're putting yourself in a position where you might not have all the information you need to complete this paper. And we don't want anyone to be in that position. And then, of course, it has to currently be in business, because if it's a company that's closed or been sold to another company and is now a part of another company, you won't be able to do your analysis and make your suggestions. Looks like there's some talk in the chat, but yes, so people are just asking if it has to be public. Yep. So publicly traded. So when a company is publicly traded, they are required to submit annual reports and quarterly reports to the public. So all of us would have access to those, and it will report things like their cost information, revenue information for the company, and it gives lots of other great info that you're going to use throughout your paper, because they're, of course, as a company in their market, are doing a lot of research on their end to understand their position in the market. So you can use a lot of the information that they include in those reports. So these reports, while they're required by law, they're also a very important investment tool. So you'll notice that they're very long, the annual reports. You don't need to read the whole thing. You can go to the sections that are most relevant for what we do. But since it's a tool for investors, companies really want to explain what they're doing to potential investors in the company and to their shareholders. So that's the reason you're going to get a lot of really robust information about the kind of work the company does and where they see themselves in terms of their competition, because they're including a lot of that great information in there for their investors. All right, so James asks, will we be able to do our own research? So James, that's a great question. So the first, like I'm just saying, the first bit of research is going to be the annual report, which is primary research. So this is data that you're getting straight from the horse's mouth. This is the real stuff. So you're going to go into their annual reports and get data and other information from the company. You're also free to you will be required to do research broader than that. So a lot of students have luck finding what they need through simple Google search. But if you're not finding what you need, or if a lot of things are behind a paywall, I really find the Shapiro Library to be super helpful. They have a chat feature, which is 24/7. So if you're struggling to find something, you can use the chat feature with the librarian, say, this is the kind of thing I'm looking for, and then they can help you search for it and link you right to whether it's academic papers or even an ebook that addresses the topic that you're looking for. They're just such a huge help. I've even used them to find stuff. I think I was looking for market share for airlines for something particular for a student, and they were an awesome help. So some people are asking about Wikipedia and Investopedia. So those sites, you should never be citing a site like that. But some students do use them to find some basic information as a jumping off point. And oftentimes a site like Wikipedia especially will include links to academic research. So then you can follow those links and find an academic paper on a subject, maybe something like supply and demand related to your company or just to the industry overall. And then you can use that in your paper. So once you get to the actual source of the information, that would be the thing that you use and then the thing that you cite. So Wikipedia can be helpful in that way as a jumping off platform to find the actual evidence that you're looking for. Just don't cite them directly. So Lori asks about using Wikipedia for the history. Again, anything that Wikipedia has in it, they usually source from somewhere else, and they list other sources. So the history you can usually find from the company's website. That's usually where Wikipedia gets that stuff, or other sources. So I would do not cite Wikipedia. I mean, I can't stress that enough. So that's just a very clear, don't cite Wikipedia. Now, should you go and read the Wikipedia page to give yourself some background information? Yes, you can do that. And then, like I said, use that as a launch point to find where they got their information, and then you go check it out yourself. But as far as the history of the company, usually the company's own website has information on that. So Rena asks if we're supposed to focus on the most current annual report. Rena, you're not going to be doing a lot of data analysis. You're not going to be doing any real data analysis in this milestone. But for future milestones, when you do include some data analysis, usually we recommend at least 5 years of data. Some annual reports cover 5 years of information. Some annual reports only cover 3 years. So if your annual report for the latest year, which would be 2016, since we're in 2017, if it only covers 3 years, you want to go back a couple years and get an older annual report so you can at least have 5 years worth of data. And also, like I said, their annual reports have lots of great general information where they're talking about their business and their competitors and the overall market, demand for their products, that they're just discussed in general. So you might want to read that from the past few years, not just from 2016. So 2016 is where you ought to start, but then work your way back so you're getting a bigger picture understanding of how the company's been doing for the past 5 or more years, and also how they see themselves in the market and amongst their competitors. But again, you're not going to have to do a lot of that for this milestone just yet. So Stephanie, if you're having any, Stephanie asks about citing different pages from the company website. If you're having any troubles with that, I would suggest there's lots of websites that help with citation management that can walk you through how to cite a specific spot on a web page. Most of the time, at some point, you're going to have to give the full hyperlink, and that would take you directly to the direct page that you were on. So Cite This For Me and Citation Machine, I think, is the other one. Those are ones that students find really helpful. And also the Writing Center is a great help for citation management. And in our courses, we have a link to some APA resources as well that can help you out with how to cite a website, a particular part of a website. So Carol asked if the links posted for the company choices in Blackboard are the most current annual reports. I'm not sure, Carol, if they're 2015 or 2016. All publicly traded companies will have 2016 reports out by now, since we're already in July of 2017. So if the one in our course is from 2015, make sure you also get the 2016 one. That's just, again, those are just in there sort of as a courtesy to help get you started. So if they haven't been updated for 2016, you should still definitely read the 2015 one and then add the 2016 one onto it. So Jason asks, so we won't need the annual reports for this milestone. Jason, I wouldn't go that far because you are going to give an overview of the company. We're going to get into that in a moment. And the annual report is obviously going to discuss sort of the state of affairs of the company in current day. So you're going to give a history of the company, and you're also going to give a this is what they look like now kind of overview of the company, what they're doing, where they're operating, you know, what kind of products are they selling today, what kind of services are they offering today. So that stuff you could find on the website, but you could also find in the annual report. So I would at least start skimming through it. All right, looks like we have a lot of awesome suggestions for citation management. So thank you guys for sharing those, the ones that you like the most. I certainly can't keep up with all that's out there. There's a lot. So if you find one that works for you, then yeah, stick with it. All right. So I'm going to, I'll say, Charles, you read my mind. Charles asks, what do we mean by the purpose of this paper and how it will inform your conclusion? So Charles is getting into the first of the two critical elements that we're going to cover for this milestone. So I'm going to pivot over to our template. Bear with me here while I change documents. So this is the final paper guide. So it covers all the milestones. So we're obviously just going to focus on the first section. I'm going to scroll down to there. So this document is listed in your is provided for you in that same navigation link, final project resources. And so you can use this as even as your own template. I believe it's in a Word document. So you can, this way you can make sure you're using the right font. You can make sure that your title page is formatted just like it is here. You know, you can put in your title and your name, our school under author affiliation. Actually, this has been updated, so you won't see an abstract anymore. I'm sorry that I haven't updated it here. I still have the old one. So you won't be required to do an abstract. So you'll skip this page altogether. And so you'll go right to your first section, which is the purpose statement and the history and overview of the company. So to answer Charles's question, what is the purpose of the paper? So if you read through the final project document, you'll understand quite well what the purpose of the paper is. So the purpose of the paper is that you're going to do a microeconomic analysis, and you know exactly which microeconomic tools you're going to use because they're listed for you to make specific suggestions for the company's future profitability and sustainability. So that's the purpose of this paper. Now, your company is going to be unique to you, and your conclusions, which you don't have yet, so we don't expect you to talk about those yet, are going to be unique to you. But everyone has the same general purpose, to use these tools to make recommendations for a given company. So you're going to be as specific as you can, but again, since this is just a draft and you don't have your conclusions yet, we don't expect you to go into any detail about those conclusions. So you can just leave that part pretty vague. And that's, again, that's going to be fine in terms of grading. If you have to be a little bit vague on that part, because of course you haven't done your conclusions yet, it's not going to impact your grade on the milestone. So that will be where you come back at the end, and when you submit this in week 7, you're going to come back to this section and add a little bit of that detail that gets to the point of, okay, well, these were my conclusions, and this is how my analysis is going to say, all right, I recommended that the company do X, Y, and Z. So I'm using these tools to support my recommendations of blah, 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 blah. You don't know what those are yet, so you're just going to kind of gloss over that part for now, but you will come back and add that detail later. So it looks like there's a few questions. Thanks, Kate, for keeping up. So Kaylin asked, for those of you watching this recording later, she asked, is the final submission essentially just combining all the milestones? For instance, for the introduction paper, do I need to follow a formal intro, body, and conclusion format? Or can I leave it open so the milestone picks up where I left off? So Kaylin, it's the latter. You are just writing a piece of your paper. So you're writing this purpose statement, which is about a paragraph or two long, depending on if you want to start with something catchy, but then you've got your purpose statement, and then you're going to write the history of the company. That's it. It is a portion, this milestone is a portion of a full paper. So you don't need, there will be no conclusion here. You're doing an intro paragraph or two, which includes your purpose, the purpose of your paper, which we just discussed, and then the history and overview of the company. So how they started and what they do now. Altogether, this is going to be about 2 pages of content, not counting your title page. And then, as you can see here, the next section, supply and demand conditions, that's where milestone 2 is going to pick up. And so once you've done all these milestones, yes, you're just going to put them all together, just like you said, Kaylin. And obviously, you're going to make some edits and improvements based on the feedback you get from your instructor. But the essential structure of the paper is, yes, just all of these milestones put together into one document. So hopefully that makes sense for everybody. So Gwen says, how complex should the title be? Gwen, it doesn't have to be complex at all. You're not going to be graded on the title of the paper. Usually most students just say something like, sometimes they just say the name of the company, or they say, microeconomic analysis of their company. And sometimes people try to come up with something clever, but you're not graded on the title of the paper. So Jamika asks, can we use this template in our milestones to continue to add to each milestone? Yeah, that's a great question, Jamika. So that's why we offer this to you in your course in a Word document. So you can come right in here and read about it and make a copy of it, and then delete these words, which is just, the template to explain the expectations to you, and then type in your own work. That way, like I said, you've got the margins already set up for you, you've got the font and the font size already set up for you, and the spacing is all in the format it's supposed to be in. So yes, Carrie, exactly. The final, you're going to add your feedback and you combine them all into one document. And some students just keep it all as one big document, even when they submit future milestones. Just know that, in milestone 2, if you made any changes to stuff here for milestone 1, your instructor's not going to be going back and giving you feedback on that. They're just going to be focused on the sections in the milestone. But if some students just like to keep everything in one file, and if that's how you want to do it, that's okay. But each milestone, like Kate is saying, is going to be graded all on its own. It won't be revisited. So milestone 1, you're going to grade it on after you submit it on Sunday or earlier. And then your instructor's not going to regrade that for you again for any revisions that you make until you submit the final draft in week 7. So this, like I said, this milestone is going to be fairly short. It's only 2 pages. You only have 2 critical elements that you're graded on here. And you're not really doing any microeconomic analysis yet. So this is a nice way to sort of get your ducks in a row, get some information about your company ready, find their website, poke around there a little bit, learn about them, get their annual reports for this year and maybe for the past few years. Start poking around those, see what the company has to say about itself, see where they see themselves and what changes they've been making in terms of their product offerings or their service offerings, and just sort of get to know them on that level. And then on our next milestone in week 4 is when you're going to start digging into the microeconomic analysis. So we're kind of taking baby steps to get into it, and this is the first step. I'm glad to hear it's been helpful. Does anybody have any other more questions? We do have a couple more minutes. So Laura asks, for the final paper, can we use similar wording that we use for each milestone? Laura, there are in some cases, if you do a really phenomenal job on your milestones, or at least maybe some sections of your milestones, you might not need to change anything. So we're only looking for you to make changes where your instructor has suggested that you do so. So let's say, for instance, the history of the company in the overview. I might say, hey, Laura, you did a really excellent job on the history of the company. I'd like for you to add a little bit more about what they do today. So I wouldn't expect you to change anything about the history part, but maybe add a few sentences about their current business. So most of your paper from the milestone to the final is going to be the same words. So you might, tweak a sentence here, fix a typo there, add some data here, add a little bit more detail to this section, but the vast majority of it is usually going to be the same, and you're just adding on and tweaking. So Joshua asks, is there anywhere we can see examples of the final project? Yes, Joshua. So that same left-hand navigation link, final project resources, there is a student sample paper. The student wrote the paper on Hershey. Yeah, active voice versus passive voice. Oh, someone had such a great example of it before. It's one of those things where I know when I see it, but then it's hard for me to describe because I was not an English major. I was an economics major. So the passive voice, gosh, if somebody can help me out. Yeah, to not use the active voice. A passive voice is maybe like, was created, where you sort of are turning the subject around in that way, versus he created or I created. And that's just and you'll see in the example paper, you don't want to use a lot of I or we. So you want to say this paper will analyze, or the microeconomic tools will be applied. So in that sense, that's what we mean by the passive voice. Instead of saying, I will use these tools, as an example. And again, this isn't something you're going to be strictly graded on. Really our focus here is on the content of your analysis, not so much on that. But when you write a paper of this style, whether it's in this class or in a future class, or even, if you're writing a report at work, this is the way that you should be writing such a report or such a paper or any sort of presentation. That's this style to be using, to use in your writing. So again, this isn't something strict. This is just good advice. So Carrie says she's looked at the Hershey paper and she doesn't see a section for purpose of the paper. That section doesn't have its own title because it's just the introduction, Carrie. But if you read it, she should come out and say, the author of that paper, say what the paper sets out to do. I don't have it handy to share with you guys and show on the screen, I don't think. But you'll notice here in the guide, there's no section title that says introduction. You have the title of the paper because this is the first page of the paper, and then it goes into history of the company. So it looks like some people have helped me out on the active versus passive voice thing. Again, I wish I was better at explaining that stuff. If I were an English teacher, that would be my wheelhouse. It's not. And again, I think if you check out the example paper, that will give you a good idea of the style of writing if you haven't written a research paper like at all before. Great. Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you again for the few of you who have done such a great job of explaining active versus passive. And yeah, so please do check out those resources in the final project resources link in your course. You can get this document that we're looking at here. You can get the suggested companies list if you still need to choose a company. You can read the example paper on Hershey that a student did a couple years back to kind of give you a feel of the sound and the content of the paper. There's lots of other great resources in there too. And of course, any questions you have between now and Sunday night, please email your instructor as soon as possible. The sooner you email them, the sooner they can get back to you with an answer, and you can get going. Awesome. Thank you guys all so much. Well, it is 9 o'clock, 9:01, so we are going to say goodnight to our 201 students and welcome our 202 students. So 202 students. I'm going to pull up the final project document for our class before we get into the guide. So one of the key things that it's really important for everyone in this class to understand, and if you've already taken 201, it will feel very familiar for 202, is that the work that you do on the milestones is all part and parcel of your final project. So your final project is broken up into different sections, and your milestones cover each of those sections with a few exceptions. So you'll see here your final project guidelines and rubric for ECO 202 describes what you're going to be doing, what your project's about. So you're going to be taking a 10-year time period, and you're going to be analyzing it. You're going to be analyzing the macroeconomic data and macroeconomic policy of that era, and just putting together a PowerPoint presentation about it. And at the end, you're going to summarize your findings and talk about whether or not you disagreed or agreed with the various policies that were put in place at that time. Now for milestone 1, we are going to be covering most of the first section. So you'll see here that the entire project is outlined for you, so you know exactly what to cover. The first section, Roman numeral 1, is the examination of the macroeconomic data. So we are going to cover all of this in milestone 1 except for foreign trade. Foreign trade we're going to cover in week 6, so we can't include that here for you guys. And then Roman numeral 2 is going to be your second milestone on fiscal policy. I'm sorry, it includes both. So 2A, fiscal policy, is what you're going to do for your second milestone, and 2B, monetary policy, is what you're going to do for your third milestone. And then for the final draft, you'll add in the foreign trade bit, which is here in section 1. And then you'll also add in the 2 conclusion elements, which is section 3. So I think it's really important, even though you're not delivering all this stuff this week, naturally, since we're only in week 2, to have an understanding of what your final product is going to look like. So your final product is going to be a PowerPoint presentation that covers each of these items listed here in this order. We're going to start with items 1A, B, and C. Everything that's included in those. Roman numeral 1A, B, C. And one other thing I do like to point out, so students have this in their mind going into the course, is that the final project rubric is slightly different than the milestone rubric. So the final project rubric has, just like your discussion board rubric, it has 4 proficiency levels. So it has the exemplary, which is full credit, proficient, needs improvement, and not evident. On your milestone rubric, there won't be an exemplary option. So proficient will be full credit for your milestone. So the milestones are sort of graded like a draft. So we don't expect you to hit that exemplary level in order to achieve full credit in terms of your grade, your score, just yet. Because you're going to get some feedback from your instructor on your milestone. Again, think of it like a rough draft, even though you're going to put your best foot forward, but you're going to get feedback. And then you're going to apply that feedback and improve upon those elements so that for your final project, you'll be able to reach this exemplary level ideally and earn full credit on those elements. So just keep that in mind when you work. The guide that I'm going to share with you in a moment is designed to help you reach that exemplary level. And some students are able to reach the exemplary level on the milestone and they don't have to make a lot of edits on their final. But just understand that the grading is a little bit different. So always good to have the end in mind, even when you start. Okay. So
I'm going to head on over to our guide because we do have a lot to cover since you have quite a few critical elements in this section. All right, here we go. Scroll back up to the top. So this, like I said, this project is based on based using a PowerPoint presentation. You can use this template that we've shared with you in the class. It's pretty basic in terms of colors and bells and whistles. You're not graded on creativity. You're graded strictly on content. So if you look over the rubric, you can tell that. If you do want to make it a little bit more interesting visually and use your own stuff in the background, that's great. Do keep it clean and professional. Imagine that you would be presenting this to a group. Or you could stick with just the standard SNU stuff that we've got on here and just use that. That's fine. You won't be docked points if you don't jazz it up. So you'll have your title page, your title slide. And then this first slide here, we do expect it to be in your paper, although it's not specifically graded in terms of the rubric. But this is going to set you up for the following elements that you are graded on. So a quick overview of the history of your time period, with maybe just a few bullet points of some of the major things that happened in the 10-year time period that you chose will go here. And that's going to inform some of the stuff that comes up next, which is specific to the rubric. So the first two elements are on GDP. So this says 1 to 2 slides. For most students, I would say use 2 slides, but depending on how you structure your slide and how much you put in the speaker notes, you might be able to contain this all in 1 slide. So the first critical element under GDP is to show a graph, is to look at the growth rate of GDP in your time period and discuss the significance of what you see over the 10-year period. So you're going to show a graph of real GDP growth rates for each year of your decade and highlight significant changes in growth rates, like a dip or negative growth, which we call a recession, or a big increase, a boom, which we call an economic expansion. We've got some links here to the Federal Reserve Economic Database, which is nicknamed FRED. That's pretty much your best go-to place for all the data you're going to need for this. There are a couple instances where we send you elsewhere, depending on the time period you have and what you're looking for. But for most of it, FRED has everything that you need. So if you follow this link here, this will take you to GDP. But remember that you need to get the GDP growth rate. So we've got the way to calculate the GDP growth rate here. And then once you've calculated it, you can put it in a graph and share it on your slide. And if you want to play around with FRED, which we do have a video that introduces you to how to play around with FRED right here in this link on the third bullet point down in this section. You could even adjust the graph in FRED when you get there to show the growth rate right there, and then you don't have to create it yourself. So that's fine too. Some students aren't as comfortable manipulating the FRED site as others, so you can do it either way. But you'll get the data you need, and then you can calculate the growth rate yourself, or you can do that within the FRED site and just grab the graph from there once you've manipulated it. So Stephanie, great question. So Stephanie asked, I tried clicking on the links on the PowerPoint, but it didn't work. So a funky thing about PowerPoint and hyperlinks is that the hyperlinks don't work unless you are in slideshow mode. So if you turn on slideshow mode at the top and then scroll through each page, you can click on any of those links. And if you just type in FRED economic data or Federal Reserve economic data, you can find it too. But this way the links work directly. Yeah, I wish there was a way around that in PowerPoint, but unfortunately that's just part of how the software works. So it's one of the limitations that we gotta just live with, I guess. So Troy asks, are we to ignore PowerPoint guidelines about slide content? Troy, are you referring to some of the suggestions in Module 2? So I believe in Module 2, there's a couple of links about how to
how to construct your slides and what to include on slides and what not to include on slides, just to give you some advice. I think that's maybe what you're referring to. So there are a lot of words on this slide, yes. I could have broken it up into 2 slides, but we don't have strict guidelines about how much text to put on a slide. You want to make it so that you can read it and that only the most important things are on the slide. But no one's going to be doing a word count. When you go into an explanatory paragraph, if you want to write a paragraph is going to be in the speaker notes. So there's going to be times where you have a graph on there, like for instance, a graph of GDP growth rates. So the rate of growth for every year for the 10-year time period you chose, you're going to have the graph up there. Maybe you'll have a few sentences bullet pointed like I do here underneath the graph to talk about it. And then in the speaker notes, you'll have a paragraph that goes into a little bit more detail talking about it. There might be some slides where you don't have a graph, so it might be a little bit more like this, where it's a bunch of bullet points, but they're each short sentences. And then the explanation, which is going to be more paragraph style, will be in the speaker notes. So as long as we don't see like paragraphs, on the slides, and it's just the important bulleted stuff, and then any visuals and any data, any graphs that you want to put on the slide, that's pretty much what we're looking for. Yeah, Troy, it's definitely, it's not, there's no one right or wrong way. I mean, I see students who put very little on their slides and then their speaker notes are super long. And then I see students who put a lot more on their slide and then don't have quite as much in their speaker notes. At the end of the day, you want it to look good and you want it to feel like something, okay, this is what I would present to a group of people. And you want it to be legible and look professional. You're mostly going to be graded on content at the end of the day, though. So your focus should be less on how awesome the slide looks, even though that is important, but making sure that you get the content right. All right, so I'm just making sure I haven't missed any important questions. So Steph asks, can we put fewer words in the slide and go into depth in the notes? Yep, so I think I covered that. That's exactly the expectation. So each of these slides, of course, not the title slide, and not actually necessarily this slide because it's not at the 10-year period. This slide isn't associated with a rubric element, but all of the slides that are directly related to a rubric element, the rest that we're going to go through, you'll notice the rubric does require you to include speaker notes. So again, those speaker notes are where the details are going to come. So you notice that, we can read this, but of course, when I talk about it with you all, I go into more detail than what's just on this slide. So that's the same thing you're going to do, except you're not actually going to speak to anybody. Your speaker notes are what you might say. So Stephanie asks, how long do the speaker notes have to be? That's a good question. They're usually at least a paragraph, so a few sentences long, depending on, first of all, how much you covered on each slide. Some students really like to spread out their information, so each slide just covers a little bit of stuff. And then obviously the speaker notes are shorter, but they're going to end up with more slides than someone else who tries to cram more in, but then their speaker notes are very long. So, I would say most of the time I see between 1 and 2 paragraphs in the speaker notes. So Anthony asks, for the speaker notes, are we just using the note feature of PowerPoint? Yep, so when you have PowerPoint open, you'll notice that down at the bottom, there's a notes section, which you can make bigger or smaller. That's where you'll type it in. So you're going to type it paragraph style. You will include citations. So if anything in there that you would cite if it was like a paper, you would cite it there too. Just, you've got your in-text citation, and then later, down, you're going to have a slide that's for your reference list. But, you're going to be writing it like you might write an academic paper. It's going to be a paragraph. It's, you're with your explanation or with any additional detail that didn't make sense to put on the slide. And the slides also will have things like in-text citations as well.
So obviously the data you get is from somewhere. So any graph or any data tables that you share throughout your presentation will need an in-text citation. And any bullet points or any text that you have that you need to credit where you got the information from, if that's the case, you would include an in-text citation. All right, so looks like some people are helping out DA with finding the right file. So hopefully that gets squared away for you, DA. All right, so we've talked about the first element on GDP here. Now the second element is asking you again, so this is where those events that you listed up here are going to come in handy. So this is asking you to look at 2 or 3 of the most relevant events from this time period that impacted the US economy and talk about specific models, how they can demonstrate the impacts that they had on the economy. So at this point in the course, we haven't developed all of the models that we're going to develop. So there's going to be a couple more coming up. But for this point in time, the GDP formula is going to be the best tool for you. So the GDP formula basically spells out the different aspects of the economy and how they add up to make our kind of national accounting. So in the GDP formula, which we've got the link to here, that includes consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. So any major event that impacts one of those things will show up in GDP, all other things being equal. So for example, 9/11 was obviously a major event and it had a major impact on the economy. So after 9/11, people were naturally very, very scared and worried about everything really. And that erodes consumer confidence. So when consumers don't feel confident about things in general, they tend to spend less. So we would see consumption go down. So in the GDP formula, the C plus I plus G plus X, that consumption, that C that's in that basic formula, will be negatively impacted from an event like 9/11. So that would be one way you use this model, the simple GDP formula model, to explain how an event like 9/11 impacted the economy. So those are just like a very basic example. So, a war, wars or other examples that can impact GDP in different ways. Obviously, through government spending is one way, but also can have an impact on something like consumer confidence as well. So the next couple of elements, and this says 1 to 2 slides. It's almost always at least 2 slides. Some students take even more than 2 slides. So you probably wouldn't want to try and squeeze it into one. Unemployment and inflation. So this is 2 critical elements are covered here. So the first one, just like with GDP, is asking you to just look at the data for unemployment and inflation and just discuss the trends that you see and discuss how the changes in both are related to changes in GDP growth. So we've got links here that to our textbook. These first 2 links up at the top go to our textbook to talk about, okay, this is how we define unemployment. This is how it's calculated. Same for inflation. There are different inflation indices. So you're going to show one, most likely. We've got linked to one here. But the textbook talks about different ones. And you can include whichever one you want if you don't want to use the one that's linked here. But whichever one you choose, you're going to discuss how it's calculated and what's included in it. And then we've got the data links here. So this is just like above from GDP, just like this one. It's going to take you to Fred, I believe, that these both go to Fred. And you just adjust for your time period, and then you can grab the data right from there. And then the second part of the unemployment and inflation bit, the second element, just like above, you're going to apply specific models that we developed throughout the course to discuss this. So again, one of them that's listed here, this last bullet point is talking about a model that we'll develop later in the course. So we don't expect you to include that for right now. But for the time being, you can again use that same GDP formula and just the general relationship between unemployment and inflation to talk about this. So when unemployment is high, people have less money to spend. So obviously that's going to impact consumption, for instance. So, and then we know that consumption is part of the GDP formula, so that will follow through on that side. And another one, when inflation is high, prices are always going up, and that affects things like consumption and investment, and even government spending. So those are some of the things that you can talk about here before we get into the ADAS, which means aggregate demand and aggregate supply model. So this is one of those instances where this is very much going to be a rough draft, this last element, and you're going to want to come back and add some detail here to wrap it up with the model that you develop in week 3, I believe, either week 3 or week 4 of the course. So again, why you're not graded as strictly on the milestone as you will be on the final draft, because you just don't have all the tools yet. So before I move on, so for this one, what I would suggest is if you want to keep things not too spread out, you can do the data for both unemployment and inflation on one slide. Usually students, can make the graphs fit together on one slide without it looking too small, and you can still read the information. And then talk about the changes you see in both. So maybe a paragraph in your speaker notes about what you see in inflation, a paragraph about what you see in unemployment and how that relates to changes in GDP, and then a separate slide about the models. Or some people like to separate it the other way, do all the unemployment stuff on one slide for both of these critical elements, and then do all the inflation stuff on another slide for both of the critical elements. So those are the kind of different ways you can break it up, depending on your own preference. All right, so the very last slide is on interest rates. So this one says 1 to 2 slides. Most students actually are able to fit this on one slide. So I wouldn't try to stretch this out into 2 slides unless there's a couple of different things you want to specifically talk about. But for the most part, just like with above, this is a data-based section. You're going to be getting the data for interest rates. We've got a few different ones you could look at. The federal funds rate is the most basic rate. That's the rate that the Federal Reserve lends out to banks at. The 3-month Treasury rate is on 3-month US bonds. So that's going to be generally a little bit higher. And then the bank prime loan rate is another rate. That's basically when you go to a bank and want to take out a loan, there's a base level loan rate that they work off of and add on to depending on what kind of loan they're giving you. So each of these, they'll move together generally, with federal funds being the lowest. Most students just choose to show the federal funds rate, but if you want to show a different one for a specific reason that's important for your decade, or if you want to show more than one, we've got the links to them here. And then once you've got the data, you're going to discuss these relationships. So how is the interest rate affected by, and how does it affect inflation? How would investments in foreign trade rates increase or decrease based on movements in the interest rate? How does GDP, how is that impacted by the interest rate? Now, to review this stuff, we've got a link to the spot in the textbook that specifically talks about it, just to make it very streamlined for you guys. So if you click on this link, that'll take you to a video overview of that part of our textbook. And then you can go read that section of the textbook if you'd like more detail, but the video does a pretty good job reviewing these relationships. All right, and then this is the document that we're looking at is the whole thing. So this is where you're going to end. You're not going to go on to foreign trade and imports. You're going to end right here at interest rate slide. But what you will need to add is, I'm going to go all the way to the bottom, is a reference slide. So you're going to have, obviously at the very least, you're going to have the data sources. So where you got the inflation, unemployment, GDP, and interest rate data. At the very least, all that should be cited here. And Fred
the Fred website does make it really easy to cite. I think they have a cite button, but if they don't, we have a lot of great resources out there. You could probably even Google how to cite Fred specifically for the data, but you'll include that here in APA style. There should be a link in your course to some general APA style citations. There's also some websites that students really like to use, like Cite This For Me. And of course, there's always the Writing Center. They're a great resource to help with citation management. So that is that. I don't see any other questions popping up. So if I pause, I'm just looking to make sure I haven't missed anything. But so the basic gist of this is you are going to show you should have at least 4 graphs presented here with annual data for each of these macroeconomic indicators. So GDP growth rate. A lot of students still just put in a graph of GDP, but you'll notice that the rubric specifically asks for GDP growth rate. So GDP would be in millions or trillions of dollars. The growth rate is a percentage. So whatever you put for the GDP, it should be a percentage. Usually it's growing something between whether it's a little bit negative and as high as, depending on your decade, maybe like 5%. So that's the general range you're looking at. Inflation is usually, depending on how you present it, it can be an index or it can be a rate, a percentage rate. Unemployment will also be a percentage rate. And interest will also be a percentage rate. So most of the things that you're presenting here are going to be shown in percentages. So you're going to have 10 different numbers on a line graph for each year, a different percent number. So just keep that in mind when you present your data, that that's what you should be showing. So you're going to have at least 4 graphs, and then you're going to have some explanation of how the GDP formula explains some of this stuff and how this is related to the major events of your decade. So Chauncey has hand raised. Unfortunately, participants on this site can't speak. So if you have a question, put it in the chat and we'll make sure that we get to it, Chauncey. Thank you. I wish we could, but with everyone's different hardware, it would be a nightmare to try and get audio for everybody. Oh, your son's interested in economics. I'm so excited. I love it. Future economists, both of you. Tell him to keep that enthusiasm all throughout school, if he's still in school. All right, so yep, just make sure you've got those graphs. Make sure you're using the GDP formula as the model that you're using to explain some of these relationships between the data and the major events of your time period. And make sure that all of your content slides have speaker notes. So those are the big takeaways. And I strongly encourage you guys, especially, and I think it could be handy for future classes too, to get familiar with Fred. So Fred, we linked just to one of their videos. They actually have a ton of how-to videos. They have their whole own YouTube channel. And our YouTube channel, where's Ellen? Is Ellen on the line? Ellen is another instructor here, and she always has my YouTube channel playlist ready to go. But where we share this, the recording of this webinar tomorrow is in the SNU Eco playlist. And we've also got some of the Fred how-to videos there as well. So the one we've shared here is their basic intro video, but then they've got some more specific ones as well on their own YouTube page. So once you get in there, it's pretty malleable, the site. You can adjust the graphs and grab them and embed them into your PowerPoint and do all this really neat stuff. And they've got so much data that they compile from everywhere, stuff that might help you in future classes that aren't even on economics, but where you need data about something specific. Fred sometimes has it. I mean, they have stuff like gas prices and like air travel, weird things like that are maybe more business specific and not so much about macroeconomics, but they also have that stuff there. So, you know, learning it for this class might help you out well beyond just this course. So Christine asks, will we get a text saying where to go and that is available for us to view this presentation? Yes, Christine, you can expect that. So once we post this recording to YouTube, we will push out the link, the YouTube video link through the text reminder, since I know that if you guys are like me, sometimes it's easier for me to just watch a video on my phone. So that way you can just go to YouTube right from the link on your phone. But it will also be posted in your courses in an announcement. So if you would rather watch it on the big screen on your computer, keep an eye out in your Blackboard course from your instructor with a link as well. And then another neat thing is you can always just bookmark our playlist. And that way, if it's bookmarked, you know, if you can use it for the next, 7-8 weeks that we're together, you'll have that our playlist or YouTube playlist bookmarked. You can just go check there and find these recordings, past recordings from other terms, and lots of other helpful videos. And then jump to Fred from there and just use that as a one-stop shop too. And that way you don't have to be searching for the YouTube link for this specific webinar or for some other specific webinar. They'll all be on that playlist. Great. I'm glad you guys found it helpful. Always good to hear. All right. If there's no other questions, good night to everyone. And if you do think of any questions you have between now and Sunday night, do email your instructor as soon as you can. They're more than happy to walk you through some of this stuff, whether it's navigating how to use Fred or better understanding how an event is related to GDP growth or unemployment or inflation or any of those things. They're a great resource for that. So don't hesitate to ask. The earlier you get started, the earlier you'll find out if you need a question, if you have a question that needs answering before you finish. So definitely don't wait till the last minute if you can. I know that's difficult because we're all super busy, but it'll be good to get any of those questions in well before Sunday night. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great night.